Is it possible to beat Megabonk with the minimum weapons and tomes? The Steam comments say no, the game's too meta-dependent, too specific or too hard. I was deep in the salt mines, slurping up the tears of the thumbless fucks who failed to b-hop, and I kept seeing complaints. I'm stunned they didn't write these comments with a crayon. No, seriously, these people snuck into the gene pool when the lifeguard was off duty. Naturally, this escalated my inner masochist, and I was absolutely bricked up to take the challenge. In theory, this sounds entirely possible, until you realize the insane levels of difficulty gain required to maximize experience before Bark Vader. Welcome to our protagonist, Dicehead. He has the unique ability to increase a random stat every time he rolls a 6 on his dice. What I didn't expect was how absolutely bonkers this can be when scaled. The run was a gambler's wet dream, and as the world's least prepared strategist, I set off to destroy everything. My plan was simple. If I could stack enough projectile bonuses, I could drown the screen in dice and show how hilariously broken our protagonist's mechanics are. Every time I rolled a 6, it makes me strong. Exponentially stronger. Of course, I hadn't thought through that with limited skips, rerolls, or banishes, I would eventually be backed into taking whatever was offered to me. Enter our turd rolled in glitter. Perfectly on brand for beating the end stage boss with the minimum weapons and tomes. This was hardly a run and more of a panicked scramble, so I began stacking movement bonuses. I reasoned that if I couldn't kill my enemies, at least I could outrun my mistakes. As Justin Gage said, if one goblin can hold you down, 2 can kill you. Every shrine and every level meant more experience and difficulty gain. My logic was more enemies meant more experience and enough 6s that Dicehead would become a statistical anomaly, a sentient lottery ticket. With the first stage boss fast approaching, we were sprinting headfirst into the first true test of our current experiment. Were the Steam comments correct? Was I really being coerced into a meta build to even complete the run? The little barks emerged from the altar like the final exams for a course I'd slept through all summer. All I needed was precision, patience, and enough dice rolls to make RNGs blush. Every attack from the stage boss was a reminder that I'd made several questionable decisions, all in the name of hubris. I'd made it this far, and if Dicehead was going down, it would be in a spectacular and mathematically improbable blaze of glory. Then finally, success. The gamble had paid out, and as gems flowed into my pockets, I was left in awe that against every reasonable prediction, Dicehead stood victorious. A monument to probability and poor decision-making. I'd rolled and the dice had spoken. Today they woke up and chose violence. All that was left was to leap foolishly and gloriously into Tier 2. Basking in the glory of reducing Little Bonk to rubble was a brief luxury. Predictably, entering Tier 2 came with a strong sense of melancholy, for here theory diverged from reality. The difficulty scaling isn't so much a curve as it is a wall, and I was climbing it with a spoon, but climb it I would. My carefully curated strategy devolved from strategic selection to pick whichever option doesn't guarantee death. I hoarded every anvil upgrade I could muster, convinced that if I could perfect the dice and bow, I could survive long enough to call it intended gameplay. Meanwhile, I prayed for the sucky magnet, and yet while I would drag myself through a mile of broken glass to hear one fart through a walkie-talkie, my prayers went unanswered. Still, this reinforced an important truth. You don't need meta upgrades to gamble on a lucky run, though it certainly helps to have dice that are unnaturally cooperative. At this stage, it became clear the size tome was an unsung hero, available to all, often overlooked or maligned by the less talented. Could the unloved, red-headed stepchild of tomes make it possible to defeat the second stage boss? The absurdity of this challenge was starting to grow on me. As Dicehead struggled to break the laws of probability, I was left to fret over the looming vindication of Chadbark. If I failed, it would only reinforce the crybaby claims that Megabonk is fundamentally broken. The arrival of the local PD offered no reprieve. They weren't a foe, but a phenomenon, one to be studied. Here I learned Dicehead's strength wasn't innate, but rather a byproduct of exploiting a universal weakness in video game AI. Jumping in small circles. Danny Dev, clearly hadn't accounted for my advanced mastery of frantically jumping. Their sudden demise lent me a dangerous amount of confidence, so when Chadbark rose from the earth like a paragon of vengeance, it felt less like an event and more like an intervention, punished for my hubris and refusal to use anything meta. While Dicehead optimistically chipped away at the stage boss, I was left to appreciate my spacebar's resilience, getting slammed like a screen door in a hurricane. Mathematically speaking, this shouldn't have been working. Statistically speaking, I should have been dead. And yet, against all reason, I achieved what can only be described as an anomaly: survival. Chadbark had fallen, not to skill, but to the persistence of bad ideas executed exceptionally well. Entering Tier 3, Dicehead had begun his ascension to omnipotence, or at least what passes for it when your entire build relies on dice rolls and denial. I'd love to claim this was the product of tactical mastery, but in truth it was a desperate plea to the gods of RNG. If I could redo this, I'd grab the key and crank power-up drop chance, because apparently even probability demands paperwork before cooperating. Elites drop chests, chests mean power-ups, and power-ups let me continue to pretend I know what I'm doing. Here, Dicehead ran, auraless, magnetless, aegisless, the very embodiment of the meta of poverty. I was raw dog in tier 3 with nothing but misplaced confidence and the haunting memory of poor decision making. And yet somehow the setup was working. It was as though Megabonk's internal logic had filed for unemployment and the physics engine had joined the strike. Every shrine and chest felt like the universe sighing and saying, "Fine, have this one, you tragic little man." But the closer we got to the end, the more the illusion began to crack. With the clock winding down and most of Dicehead's strategy now duct taped together from shrines and divine pity, I began to dread the inevitable arrival of Chunkum. In my panic, I remembered something critical. Dice has legs. I didn't need to tank the damage, I could simply move. This revelation was rewarded immediately with a common upgrade, proof that Divine Comedy is alive and well. A final trio of monsters stood between Dicehead and Vindication, proof that Megabonk rewards talent over orthodoxy. 3 behemoths that may force me into overtime. These silent, unfeeling monuments weren't just an obstacle, but a dissertation on futility. While Dicehead had played God with probability, each stone golem was a walking audit, ensuring I'd filled out the proper forms before proceeding to the boss fight. They weren't just powerful, they were procedurally compliant. Yet somehow they died, instantly. No build-up, no struggle, no montage-worthy sequence of heroism. Just a sudden biblical flash of loss and then silence. For a moment time stood still, then I realized I'd won. This was not part of some grand tactical foresight. Dice had simply sneezed in the right direction and probability quit. Dice had begun this journey as a humble gambler. Now he was a weapon of mass inconvenience. It was part luck, part skill and part clerical error. But the path to Bark Vader was open, and somehow that was far more terrifying. If there's one thing worse than losing in Megabonk, it's realizing the game now expects you to win on purpose. This final altercation is where my hubris and the collective stupidity of the Steam comments collided. The glorious final test that would determine Dicehead's fate. Bark Vader loomed large, a chlorophyll-infused monstrosity set about to suck off my weapon. In this battle of wits between man and tree, the tree is smart, but Dicehead was persistent. The tree had reach and several powerful weapons, and I was armed with dice and an inflated sense of confidence. From the moment the fight began, it was chaos. Projectiles screamed through the air and I was throwing dice like Bark owed me money. He was bigger, stronger, and definitely coded by someone who wanted to see me cry. The single factor the dev didn't account for was my sheer stubborn stupidity. This, dear viewer, is where the humble wrench shines. I only have 3 of them, but it makes the difference. Even without secondary weaponry, Dicehead's sheer statistical nonsense turned Bark's majestic assault into mulch. But every second he stood alive, his shrines pulsed in the corner of the arena, siphoning vitality back into his veins. If I didn't destroy them, he'd simply undie out of spite. This wasn't about damage anymore, it was about movement. Dice could claim each jump to be perfect, a calculated dodge between projectiles and area attacks the size of a small country. Many times missteps threatened to end the run and he prayed to RNGesus for protection. The 3rd shrines were placed out of pure spite, high up on a pedestal like the devs wanted to personally humiliate anyone who made it this far. I wasn't winning from meta-approved power, but by attrition. My hands cramped, my brain screamed, and my spacebar was a Morse code signal for distress. This is how giants die. Not with an explosion, but with a whisper. Not with a meta-approved arsenal of weaponry, tomes, and items, but with bunny hops, 3 wrenches, and blind faith. This fight was meant to be the great equalizer. Where the unprepared crumbled and meta-worshippers sat smugly, it became proof that skill in Megabonk isn't about precision or perfection. It's about refusing to stop moving. Dicehead didn't break the rules, he danced around them until they gave up. As the final shrine dimmed and Bark's health hit 0, I realized something. The Steam comments were right. Megabonk is meta-dependent. Movement is the meta. Dicehead's victory was living proof that if you mashed enough upgrades together, the game itself eventually gives up and declares you the winner out of pity. If nothing else, this was evidence the world doesn't always reward the prepared. Sometimes it just rewards the persistent idiot who refused to stop rolling dice. The only question remained, how far could I exploit a broken system before it remembers to fight back?